Diana, have we started?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Um, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be dialing in from. Welcome today to today's session of the Construct Africa Building a Better and More Sustainable Africa webinar series. Today we'll be addressing a topic that quite literally binds the foundation of Africa's economic integration. Today's topic is navigating opportunities, the construction sector under the AfCFTA protocol. Right. As we start, we'll just have a quick introduction from Construct Africa. We'll have a very quick jingle from Construct Africa just to be introduced to them.
From Lagos to Lusaka, Dakar to Dar es Salaam, Africa is building faster than ever. New roads, ports, power plants, cities. $1 trillion transformation in motion. But in a market this dynamic, opportunity moves quickly. And without the right intelligence, deals slow down, risks multiply, and your competitors get ahead. That's why ConstructAfrica exists, the definitive source for real-time project data, market insights, and verified intelligence across every sector of Africa's built environment. From energy to transport, mining to housing, thousands of projects, billions in contract opportunities, all searchable, trackable, and investment-ready. Used by developers, suppliers, investors, lenders, governments, and global brands who refuse to guess. They act on proven data, not headlines or hearsay. Because in Africa's growth story, information isn't optimal, it's the edge that wins markets. The projects are moving. The money is moving. If you're not tracking the market, someone else is. Start your advantage with Construct Africa.
Right. Thank you very much for that. So today, as I said, we're looking at the construction sector under the AfCFTA protocol. Specifically, we're looking at navigating opportunities within the construction sector. Just to give a brief background of the significance of today's topic, I just want to highlight a few points. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is creating the largest single market in the world by number of countries and by the size of the market. Its success really depends on the infrastructure that connects us within Africa. So whilst there's been a lot of talk about the trade that's going to be going on amongst the countries, what is actually going to underpin the success of the free trade is the infrastructure that connects us as a continent. So we're talking about our roads, our ports, our energy systems, industrial parks, and digital networks. And that precisely is why the construction sector is not just another industry under the AfCFTA. We believe that it's actually the enabler of trade itself. And for that reason, it's a very, very significant sector enabling the success of the AfCFTA. So with harmonized standards and a continent-wide market, AfCFTA opens new doors for African contractors. I'm talking about construction contractors, by the way, for African contractors, consultants, engineers, architects, suppliers, cost consultants, all consultants operating within the industry. It opens the door for them to operate right across borders, across the continent, to form partnerships and to scale their expertise across the continent. At the same time, it challenges us to address issues like financing, skills development, and regulatory alignment. So today's discussion is going to help us to unpack these opportunities and chart a path we hope for a stronger, more integrated construction ecosystem across Africa. So thank you for being here. And without further ado, we'll dive into discussions. I'm going to start by calling on our distinguished panelists. to briefly introduce themselves just before we begin our discussions. So I'll be starting with Engineer Kazewadi.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Kazawadi Papias Dedeki. I'm a civil engineer by profession. I'm the managing director of AfCFTA, which is a community benefit organization mainly to promote and advocate challenges in the built environment. I am also the past president of the Federation of Africa Engineering Organization, which gave me the opportunity to move and travel most countries of Africa. And I think my discussion is going to base on the experience and the exposure that I was privileged to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Kazewadi. I'll then move on to Dr. Hadir Ashraf.
Thanks, Dr. Sujan, and hello, distinguished panelists and audience. I'm Dr. Hadir Ashraf, the Head of International Finance and Economic Analysis at the Business Development of Yard Contractors, is specialized mainly in macroeconomics analysis, software risk assessment, and infrastructure finance across Africa, MEA, and Gulf regions. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hadir. Lovemo, can you kindly introduce yourself?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lovemo Bingandadi. I'm a trade and corridor specialist. I've worked with member states, regional economic communities, and the African Union. My inputs will be on the demand that is going to be created by the AfCFTA, which we expect the construction industry to respond to with respect to providing trade carrying infrastructure capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lovemo. I'll then call on Jumoke Ogundari, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jumoke Ogundari, and I'm the CEO of Lagos Lagoon Highway Limited, a special purpose working as a public-private partnership with the Nigerian government to build a 71-kilometer road in Lagos, the eastern part of Lagos. My background is finance. This is an interesting area for me. I will be contributing on how we can actually execute and get the benefits of AfCFTA for the construction industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jumoke. Last but not the least, I'll be calling on Madam Emily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Okay, good afternoon from me here in Accra, Ghana. Let me introduce myself. Let me see. Okay, great. I'm Emily Murundoria. I'm the director responsible for trading services, investment, intellectual property rights, and digital trade at the AfCFTA Secretariat. During this meeting, my main mandate is actually to introduce you to the issues related to the construction and engineering related services, and that is part of what we call the Protocol on Trading Services at the AfCFTA Secretariat, and also generally under the General Agreement on Trading Services at the WTO. So I'll set for you the scene on what really trading services, and in particular the construction services sector, is all about. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you very much. So thanks again once more to all our distinguished panelists. We're going to set the scene for this afternoon's discussions with a keynote presentation by the AfCFTA, where they'll give us an overview of what the AfCFTA is all about. So we're going to hear pretty much from the horse's mouth exactly what we mean when we're talking about the AfCFTA, and along the line, understanding what that means for the construction and engineering services. So over to Madam Emily to give us the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing the presentation. Okay. Okay. As I mentioned, the presentation what we're talking about when we talk about the construction services sector under the AfCFTA. Okay, great. So the outline is that we'll be dealing with the protocol on trading services. That's the main protocol under the agreement, where issues, especially related to the construction services sector, are covered. We'll then look at what progress we have made under the protocol, and then issues related to construction and engineering services. And then what are the practical opportunities under the AfCFTA that we can actually have under this protocol on trading services, some of the challenges that are faced, and then look at the recommendations and way forward. And as we go along to then negotiate under the construction services sector, what are the key issues that we will then be looking at together with you, the stakeholders in the sector. Now, when you look at the agreement, that is the AfCFTA agreement, I noticed you've written protocol, but it is actually called the AfCFTA agreement. That is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which aims to boost intra-African trade and drive industrial development by creating one unified market. And as they say, it will be approximately 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion. So you can see the importance of us coming together as Africans to really trade among ourselves under the AfCFTA. We've had what we call phase 1 protocols that have been developed, and that is the trading goods protocol, the protocol that relates to dispute resolution, and of course the main protocol that we are discussing today, which is the protocol on trading services. We have also now concluded our phase 2 protocols, which is the protocol on investment, protocol on IPR, competition policy, digital trade, and one also on women and youth in trade. Now, all these protocols have several annexes, and most of the annexes have now been adopted by the AU Assembly of Heads of State and Government, of State and Government. And what we like saying, and this is a point that needs to be kept in mind, is that AfCFTA is not just a trade agreement. It is actually a platform for economic transformation for our continent. And so we look forward to the implementation of the AfCFTA together with you, our stakeholders. Now, let's talk about trading services under the AfCFTA. As I've said, the whole AfCFTA is about economic transformation, but our trading services is really the cornerstone of Africa's economic transformation. For, as mentioned by Lovemore earlier, it's actually key for enabling not only other trading services sector, but also enabling trading goods. You cannot have trading goods without transport services. You cannot have transport services without construction, because you really need to build the ports, you really need to build the borders, and you also need to build the roads. So it enables for efficient functioning of economies and also supports the movement of both trading goods and trading services, and the movement of people and innovation and investment, job creation across the continent. Now, if we move on then to look at what approach have we used under the AfCFTA in terms of liberalizing trading services. So we have the protocol on trading services, which looks at liberalization in 3 key ways. There is what we call a schedules of specific commitment, where countries then make their market access and national treatment commitments of how they will then treat service suppliers and services coming from one country or another in the continent. Then the second element that we look at is regulatory cooperation frameworks, where we develop regulatory cooperation frameworks in that sector that will be fundamental in terms of harmonization, for lack of a better word, or common regulations that will assist to bring in the predictability that is needed in terms of liberalization and in implementation when service providers want to trade among themselves when it comes to trading services. A third and most important element for this sector is the mutual recognition agreements. Now, this is part of what has already been agreed as a built-in agenda in the Protocol on Trading Services, that there shall be the development of mutual recognition agreements. So the innovative element that we are also bringing as AfCFTA when talking about mutual recognition agreement is we also want to look at it from the sectoral perspective. And what I mean by that is that we will then be able to have the professionals in any given sector coming up and having mutual recognition agreements, the regulators themselves in a given sector also coming up and having mutual recognition agreements of their own. Now, continuing on the protocol architecture and looking then at the scope, we see that the scope that we are using, the same way goods use the HS codes, we use what we call the UNCPC, which is the United Nations Central Product Classification System. And we are looking at 12 core sectors. And when I mean 12 core sectors, it is the main big sectors, and then we have a number of subsectors under each sector, and in so doing you have about 165 subsectors that we look at when negotiating trade in services. And that is why we then had what we are calling the faced down approach, where we look at what are the priority sectors. And under trade in services, we have 5 priority sectors that were identified by our Assembly of Heads of States and Government in a meeting held in Mauritania in July 2018. And when you look at these sectors are sectors that are fundamental to enable both the movement of goods and services in the continent. Not to say that the other services sectors are not important, but to say which 5 sectors will be instrumental to ensure that we kickstart intra-African trade as we continue the negotiations. And so when we talk about business services, in it is incorporated professional services, and in particular of importance to us today would be the engineering and also the architects that are part of the professional sector under business. Then we have communication services. Communication services for us deals with broadcasting, it deals with the telecommunication services sector and the courier services sector. You have financial services, which has both the banking and the financial services and the insurance services, and in the banking and financial services, the work that Jumoke is doing in terms of financing infrastructure development in the continent then comes into play. Then you have transport services, and my colleague Lavmo will continue with that discussion. Then you have tourism and travel related services, whereby it also deals with construction services, because you need to build the hotels, you need to build the restaurants, and then in the case of travel, we also need the airports that are built by yourselves, our key stakeholders in the construction services sectors. And so, as I've mentioned, these were chosen because of their strategic value as enablers of trade and their potential in terms of ensuring that we also have regional integration. So, in this case, why then are we discussing with you construction services today? So construction services, construction and related engineering services are part of what we are calling phase 2 negotiations under trade-in services. Now, it's among the 7 sectors that I talked about, the 5 priority sectors, then we have the 7 remaining sectors. We are now calling them the additional sectors that we are dealing with in this current now new negotiations that are being kickstarted. Now, when I say being kickstarted, what we have done is that for all these sectors, we have now already undertaken situational analysis studies, and that is even how we met and started working very closely with Segun And that's how we are here now today to discuss the area of construction. So those are all the other sectors that we are dealing with. And I know for you in construction services sector, environmental services and engineer-related services also becomes fundamental even in this discussion. So then moving on to look at what progress have we been able to do since we kickstarted these negotiations in 2021 in earnest, because that is when really the Secretariat started its work, and we formed the AfCFTA Committee on Trading Services, where the negotiations are taking place. We've had our first round of negotiations in the 5 priority sectors. And to that end, I can actually mention that we have a number of schedules of specific commitment and also regulatory cooperation frameworks that have been developed. We are now kickstarting the second round of negotiations. Situational analysis have already been done, and we are also doing some work in terms of implementation. But as you can imagine, there's still a number of challenges that we are facing, especially in terms of capacity. Now, when we look at the schedules of specific commitments, we're happy to say that about 50 countries have submitted their initial offer. What we mean by initial offer is that they have indicated the areas that they are willing to then liberalize. And as I mentioned earlier, that is in terms of giving market access and national treatment to service suppliers from countries rather than their own. And to that end, 25 of those have then been negotiated and completed and adopted as schedules of specific commitments by the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. And the 25 are mentioned there. And of them, we have 2 regional economic communities that have actually presented their schedule as a group, and that is CEMAC and the EAC regions. And the EAC, it's 5 of the countries that have presented their schedule together. Then of these 25, also we have ECOWAS that has given their schedule, and ECOWAS is also giving their schedule as a group, and they have already given us the draft schedule of specific commitment, and we are working with them to then finalize it for presentation to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. The other 4 countries are Ethiopia. We have Ethiopia, Angola, South Africa, and which one is the 4th one? So we have Ethiopia, South Africa, Angola, and Mozambique, sorry about that have actually given their draft schedule of specific commitment, and we hope to conclude those for adoption by the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. So we have 2 remaining initial offers by state parties, and here maybe it's important for me to say that we call them state parties once they have ratified the agreement, and now we have 50 countries that have ratified the AfCFTA agreement, and so that's when we mention the state parties in terms of the schedules, they have to be part of these 50 countries. And maybe just to mention that it's only the 5 countries of the AfCFTA that have then gazetted their schedules of specific commitment. So moving on then to regulatory cooperation frameworks, we have 2 that have already been concluded and are awaiting legal scrubbing before being taken to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government to then become an AU law, which is the draft frameworks on communication and financial services sector. And then we have 2 in terms of transport and tourism services sectors that are pending, and we hope to finalize that work by the end of this year. Now, on mutual recognition agreements, we have developed a draft of the guidelines, and why it was important to have guidelines for the development of mutual recognition agreements under the AfCFTA. It's because when we talk about mutual recognition under the AfCFTA, it's for facilitating the movement of people, and in this case, professionals, and making it easier for also services to cross borders. And so it is important that there is some form of commonalities in terms of how these mutual recognition agreements are done. And so we felt that it was important to have draft guidelines for this case. And so work has been put into it. We've had one stakeholder engagement, and we hope to have a second stakeholder engagement towards having this work on mutual recognition done. So we will look at it from the point of view, even if we talk transport, we need the regulators in the insurance sector to be able to accept the third-party, let's say, insurance for motor vehicles to be able to move the trucks from one country to another in a much more easier way. So we hope that this work on mutual recognition agreements will also be very key and important when we are looking, and for your case, when we will be coming up with mutual recognition agreements, especially right now in the engineering professional. So moving on then to negotiations under the additional services sector, because that's where then now we will be going deeper into issues related to the construction and engineering related services in the upcoming negotiations. And as I had mentioned earlier, here we already have the sectoral study, the construction service sectoral study already done. Then if we look at some of the implementation initiatives that as the AfCFTA we have undertaken, we have our annual forum and festival in the area of tourism sector. And here we look at all the key three areas, which is the tourism, cultural, and the creative industries. And to that end, we then did what we call the Creatives Connect Africa. Our first session of it was last year here in Accra, Ghana, and we can actually say it was a resounding success, and we hope to have a second one this year still in Accra, Ghana. So we also look at how do we ensure that there is continental visibility. And so to that end, we have created a platform for the creatives, which is more focused on the film, fashion, and music industries. And we hope that as we move forward to have our trading services portal out there and attached to our AfCFTA website, we will then have more visibility on the work that we're doing under trading services. We also have what we call sector-specific tools, and here we have one in the area of tourism. We've also developed one on air transport. We have also developed what we are calling a practical guide to the protocol on trading services. And here we hope that it will look at providing capacity building for all the three key areas of stakeholders. That is the governments, that's the policymakers, the private sector, and also the civil society and academia. So we hope that that practical guide, it will be useful for all those key areas, and it should be launched later this year in one of our key meetings. Then we have our institutional partners. I've mentioned a few there, and then we ensure that we have inclusive participation. And then we are also coming up with Pan-African Coalition. And in that, I believe one of the key areas will be construction services sector. So why then are we focused on the construction and engineering services sector, and why does it matter for the AfCFTA? So as I've mentioned, this is a key enabler for trade in services. And so that is why we are discussing it today under the AfCFTA. I will move forward on this one to just then look at the market context of Africa's construction sector. And we see that the sector contributes about 3 to 8% of GDP across Africa. And here, because you are most of the people, the participants are also part of the construction services sector. I know you already have most of these statistics. And then, of course, in the construction services sector, the government is the biggest player. And so we cannot miss, and this is one of the key issues that we will also be discussing under our regulatory cooperation framework under the construction sector, how we will deal then with government procurement. We then look at what is the trade potential of intra-African construction services. We see that countries like Egypt, and I'm so happy that we have Dr. Ashraf with us today, are among the biggest players when we are talking about the construction services sector. So we'll hear from her how then can we ensure that there is more trade, there is more market access between our countries. Now, then moving on to issues of liberalization and the state of liberalization. And here we are looking at it from the WTO and the commitments that countries under the WTO, the African countries under the WTO that have made commitments, what kind of commitments they have made, and how then it will be used even when negotiating at the AfCFTA level. And maybe here I can just mention that at the AfCFTA level and the link with the commitments that countries have done at the GATS is that we start the baseline for your commitments is what the commitments you have made at the WTO, and that is under the General Agreement on Trade in Services. And then we build on that and say then improve for your African brothers and sisters. And so that is the model that we have used in terms of the negotiations under the AfCFTA. Now, what are the practical opportunities that are there under this sector for trading services? The main one is, of course, cross-border infrastructural development. So here we look at it from the point of view that we need to develop the infrastructure in the continent, and in so doing, improve the roads, the rail, the ports, the energy systems, the logistics corridors in the continent, and ensure, therefore, that we have regional connectivity and trade facilitation. Then there is the real estate and urban development. And here, even in our just ended Biashara Africa, we featured the people in the construction sector, and in particular, what is called the development of smart cities. So we have a lot of that happening, and we had a gentleman who is in the sector and has done a number of smart cities or new cities, if you may call it that, in a number of African countries. Specifically, he has focused more on the East African area or community. And so you see that in terms of real estate and urban development, we have a lot that is happening. And so we can already plug into that sector. Then there is the expansion of the professional services sector. And this is where mutual recognition agreements that I mentioned earlier then become important. Then moving on, Pan-African partnerships and collaborations. And here we see how are we going then to create opportunities across borders. Therefore, if you have Dr. Ashraf from Egypt collaborating with a Tanzanian service provider, or collaborating with engineer Kazawadi from Rwanda, and others from other countries, Jumoko, to bring the financial component. And in so doing, we have then the partnerships and collaborations that help us to have infrastructural development in the continent. Another key area that we have been looking at also, and it's also a practical opportunity for our stakeholders, is the issue of digital infrastructure and innovation. And so we've seen growing investment in terms of data centers, digital infrastructure. And as I mentioned earlier, we have already developed the protocol on digital trade. And these are some of the issues that are already interconnected in it. And so we can say that construction now is more than building. It is a strategic enabler of trade industrialization, connectivity, and economic transformation across the continent. So we really need to develop our construction services sector and make it cross-border as possible so that we are then able to trade across the continent. Now, what are the key challenges that we have seen as identified under the sectoral studies that we have done? One of the key one is regulatory fragmentation, and and here that is the work that we will be undertaking under regulatory cooperation frameworks becomes very important. We also see that there are limited liberalization commitments. You've seen the commitments that countries have done under the WTO. And so how do we ensure that we have more comprehensive commitments, both for market access and national treatment under the AfCFTA that will then support the development of this sector and intra-African trade in particular under the sector? Skills and capacity gaps, how do we support that? Financing constraints, and we will hear from Jumoke more about this. You have a limited movement of professionals, and this is in terms of visa restrictions, work permit requirements. How do we improve on this? And maybe I can mention that even under the AfCFTA, this is work that we are undertaking under mutual recognition agreements and also in support of movement of business people in the continent. As I mentioned earlier, 50% of the work under construction is by government. So how do we have elements of government procurement in it, and also issues of procurement preferences? How do we bring on board women in this very important sector? Then as I move to close, then I look at what are the recommendations of a way forward that we can have. So one of the key one, of course, and for us, this one is key for you as stakeholders to also ensure that you push and lobby at the national level and regional level to show the importance of the sector and why more liberalization in the sector will be useful to ensure that we have more cross-border trade and ensure that we have infrastructural development. The work being more responsive and more committed to the work related to mutual recognition agreements, and also the work on regulatory cooperation frameworks, so that we can have policies and we can have regulatory frameworks that will push for intra-African trade, especially in the construction and engineering related services sector. Movement of professionals in the sector will also be key to ensure that we have more participation. So I finish with what I call call to action. And here it's in terms of strengthening the GATS commitments that countries have done under the GATS and now in the AfCFTA, and all the other countries then to come up with commitments that will assist in terms of policy development in the sector that will facilitate then more service suppliers being able to participate in the sector. In terms of regulations, we will need more harmonization of licensing procedures, development of mutual recognition agreements, so as to create a level playing field for African firms in the sector. And also in terms of investment, and when we talk investment, we also look at issues of financing, and here it's to mobilize finance for African MSMEs to establish and also to establish regional guarantee funds and promote cross-border joint ventures and partnerships. I will stop here by saying that Africa's construction sector is actually key and the most dynamic, will have the most dynamic growth stories. And with the AfCFTA, we provide the framework to turn that potential into intra-African trade reality. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Asante sana, merci beaucoup. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Madam Emily. That was a very, very insightful presentation. It's shed a lot of light into the work of the AfCFTA. I don't want to comment too much on it because we have lots of discussions to do. But a couple of things that just struck me. I mean, we keep on talking about how important the AfCFTA is. But to put it in context, 1.3 billion people. I mean, let's even forget we're talking about Africa. We're talking about a free trade area of 1.3 billion people, with a GDP equivalent of 3.4 trillion US dollars. Now, by any stretch of imagination, that is a very, very sizable free trade area. I also noticed that you said that AfCFTA is not just a trade agreement, which is very true. We keep on sort of banding the word agreement around. It's actually a platform for economic transformation of Africa, which means it's something that needs to be taken very seriously. In taking it seriously, we need to look at the enabling factors that can actually, make it successful. And dare I say that one of those enabling factors is the construction sector. There are several factors, but the construction sector keeps on popping up as being very crucial to providing the underpinning infrastructure for enabling the AfCFTA to actually be successful. We're going to get into the discussions now, but one of the other things that sort of came across to me, which was very encouraging, is the fact that you've taken quite a number of what I will call those sort of critical success factors on board and are working with them. And one of them being the mutual recognition agreements. Now, if there's going to be cross-border trading, there has to be mutual recognition of some sort. And taking the bull by the horn and addressing these issues right from the start is really very crucial. And I'm very glad to see that you've taken that on board. I mean, the Secretariat has taken that on board. So thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Also good to see that the agreements, negotiations, etc., have progressed, or they keep on progressing, and that they've reached a very advanced stage, which is very good. All right. To further set the context for our discussions, we're very, very privileged to have with us as well a representative of the Arab contractors. The Arab contractors is really one of the oldest cross-border construction contracting firms in Africa. They've been operating across Africa since the early 50s. So even before we're talking about the African Free Trade Agreements, they've weathered the storms of, they've seen all the difficulties in operating cross-border, and they're currently engaged right across Africa. Well, without sort of talking on their behalf, I'll right now call on Dr. Hadi, who is going to give us a brief overview of the Arab contractors. Dr. Hadi.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Sweden, for this introduction. And I also would like to thank Madam Emily for this conclusive presentation. I think we will have also, given our discussion, inshallah, go further for engagement through the AfCFTA also. So our discussion and after that. But right now, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this distinguished webinar, and allow me to briefly introduce our contractors as one of the leading construction and engineering companies in the Middle East and Africa, and one of the region's most established governmental construction institutions, supervised mainly by the Ministry of Housing in Egypt. It's founded in 1955 with nearly 70 years of experience in large-scale infrastructure delivery. Today, we operate in about 34 countries across Africa, the Middle East and the Gulf region also, with a workforce exceeding 170. This number is not specific, according to 2022, but now it's 170 million employees and a turnover with about 3 billion USD. Over the past 3 decades, the company has significantly expanded its footprint and strategic weight across Africa, African continent, becoming widely recognized as a trusted infrastructure and development partner for governments, institutions, and international stakeholders. as we have received international recognition, including ENL Awards, MEAD Awards, Genesis World Records, and Order of Merits from multiple African governments. Our operational portfolio is highly diversified across sectors, including transportation infrastructure like roads, bridges, tunnels, railways, airports, metro lines, in addition to water treatment, water desalination plants, dams, energy projects, residential, commercial, and healthcare and educational facility. Also urban development, and also marine and ports infrastructure, even a nuclear power station, as we are right now working in Taba nuclear power station with Rosatom in Egypt. And we have three major lots of this project, which positioned contractors as not only a construction company, but a structurally integrated development partner, one capable of delivering complex multi-sector projects across diverse African operation environment, contributing to regional integration, economic connectivity, and sustainable growth across Africa and wider region. About briefly our projects. Yes, as we can see here are some of the iconic projects recently in Egypt, like the new parliament and the Islamic Cultural Center in the new administrative capital here in Egypt, Alexandria Library, the Coastal Tower in Al Amin city, and also the Egyptian Olympic Stadium. Also here, Bahr al-Ba'a wastewater treatment plant, which is actually one of the largest agricultural wastewater treatment plants in the world, certified by Genesis World Record with a storage capacity of 5.6 million cubic meters per day, which is equivalent to 2 billion cubic meters per year. After that, I'll share briefly. Here you can see some of diversified infrastructure achievement that illustrate both our technical capability and our commitment to Africa development trajectory. Among the most notable is in Nigeria, engineering and construction, Yotako and Y districts, Mulago Hospital in Uganda, Central Bank in Chad, Nigoma Road in Equatorial Guinea, and recently the iconic project Julius Nyerere Hydropower Dam in Tanzania, which is considered the second largest dam in Africa. It's a major renewable energy project enhancing Tanzania electricity generation capacity and supporting regional energy integration, which is about 2,150 megawatt power generation and a budget of about $3 billion. And it's actually, we support, we like to have our footprint in Africa. So also in Tanzania, this project is about 90% of the workers are locally from Tanzania. We let our legacy also in these projects for the country. So this is a quick brief introduction about our company. We are not only a construction company. May I also say that we have many subsidiaries and affiliated companies, as we have our trading companies, which is called Araco. We have AC Furniture Company, and we have also our institution for training. So it's like just a brief about our specifications and our projects in Africa.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Hadir. That's quite an extensive operation that Arab Contractors has across Africa. And I think what kind of impresses me is the fact that you've been on the continent for 70 years. I mean, you've been working across the continent for 70 years. That's a long time. You've seen all the challenges, and and over the years you've contributed, with a lot of mega projects in different areas. What we actually what we're hoping to see is much more of the likes of Arab Contractors. Homegrown African contractors that are working right across the continent. There are quite a few more. There are companies in Egypt that also work, cross-border. Sorry, in East Africa, I was going to say, that work cross-border. There are, companies all over, but obviously we want to see more of that. And we are hoping that the AfCFTA is going to facilitate that, which will ultimately contribute to skills development, contribute to the growth in economies, and contribute to infrastructure development right across the continent. All right, we'll now delve into panel discussions. We're looking at a couple of specific topics that we're going to use to address these questions. So to start off with, we're looking at sort of the implications of the AfCFTA Protocol on trading services for the construction industry, and we're just going to touch on that briefly as a starting point before we go into other topics. So my first question here is addressed to Madam Emily at the AfCFTA Secretariat, and that is essentially from what the research you've done and the things you've seen in the process of developing this, what barriers currently limit cross-border construction services, and how can the AfCFTA Protocol on Trading Services help to remove those barriers?
Okay. Did it work? Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. And as discussed in my presentation, of course, one of the key barriers that is affecting the construction sectors is the issue of regulatory fragmentation. I think I handled most of them also in my presentation to say that the fragmentation in terms of the laws and regulations that are in the different countries is one of the key impediments, followed by, of course, capacity building in terms of engineering services and understanding, if we even discuss architectural services. And how do you understand the specificities, if I may use that word, of the country where you want to do your construction works. So that also becomes important. Mutual recognition agreements are lacking, so educational qualifications from one country are not acceptable in another country. And so you as a contractor or as an engineer or as an architect trying to move from one country to another becomes very, very difficult. Not only mutual recognition, issues of even being able to live in a different country becomes difficult. So it's how then to deal with this and accept. Let me just give you the example of last week we were in Lome, Togo. We had gone for Biashara Africa, and to get into the country was already a very difficult process. But the advantage with us highlighting those kind of issues and maybe going even to that country was one of the biggest blessings, is that the president then became aware of one of these impediments to trade, which is movement of people. And he was able then to lift that issue of the visa requirement for Africans moving or going into Togo, which led then also to the same issue being dealt with by the president of the Republic of Congo. So we are seeing that some of the indirect advantages, if I may call them that, of having the AfCFTA as such issues that are dealt with in different forums, but because we now have the AfCFTA, then countries are more willing to open up to have trade and more people coming from other African countries. I'll stop there so that my panelists can have other questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I noticed that you talked about issues such as the fragmentation of regulatory frameworks across the different countries, talked about capacity development and the issue of mutual recognition of qualifications across the continent. I'll call on Jumoke Ogundare. Do you have any comments on what Madam Emily has just shared?
Thank you. I think she's covered it, but I would say that practically, if you look at each country, there's some level of protectionism, even though the intentions are good, aligned with what Madam Emily had spoken about earlier. But in reality, when it comes to it, for the visa example is a very good one. Not many people would have, or not many companies trying to enter into another country would have such privileges and access to the president. So I wonder, in terms of a solution to such challenges, whether this could not be looked at in a compartmentalized manner. So Madam Emily spoke earlier about looking at some priority sectors. So those priority sectors, could it be that as countries, or maybe starting at the regional level, some partnerships so the countries come together and agree on giving priorities for certain sectors. So if you're in the construction sector, would you then allow free movement, or would you relax or harmonize policies as it relates to construction for that particular sector? And then we can then do that incrementally, as opposed to having a broad base, because in reality, all of these policies are good and the countries have good intentions, but it just takes time to address these challenges. The challenges are real. So rather than trying to address them, at the broader level, could we then look at it incrementally and begin to solve them, maybe sector by sector, opportunity by opportunity? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jumoke. Because we're sort of running out of time, I'm going to call one more person to comment on what Madam Emily has said, if they want to. Engineer Kazawadi, do you have any comment?
Thank you very much, moderator. Yes, I have a comment. In addition to what Madam has just said, looking at the professions that she mentioned and the actors who are already in, there is, in my opinion, what I would see as a mindset of mistrust among Africans. Of course, I would say it is also affected by what we have already, because we have less infrastructure. And even those infrastructure that are in place, they are actually leading to the ports, not leading to the people and connecting to the people. So you find that countries that are bordering the oceans have access to the sea. They have infrastructures that exports what would otherwise be serving the people most. You always hear people exporting raw materials instead of processing the raw materials, which will end up providing employment and create jobs for the people. And this, because this one is consistently, politicians talk about it, but when you look at what is being done, is much less than what it is said. So that's why I call it the mindset aspect, that we keep saying what seems to be a problem, but we do less. And this is a result of, in my opinion, again, the lack of ownership, or maybe that is not a better word, insufficient ownership of what we do in terms of leadership. Then ethics, enforcing ethics. I know most professionals know and believe that they know about ethics, that they exist. They know they can bring good results, but we end up, instead of enforcing them, talking about them, and it ends in presentations and speeches. So what I want to see in this, of course, I see a lot of potential work for AfCFTA, and I appreciate what has been achieved yet, but we still need to work on the ownership, ethics, that are enforced, and also the discipline that we live, because mostly we don't say what we don't walk the talk. We simply talk and go, and problems keep coming. And why I said this is a big is a fundamental, is like when you construct a house and the house develops cracks, everybody will ask who built the foundation. What went wrong? They start to diagnose from the foundation. And yet, when it was clear and well painted, nobody really bothered because they seemed to appreciate. Now, the ethics, the discipline, and the ownership that I'm talking about is seen even in most infrastructure that we see. We have seen roads that break before the defects liability. We have seen projects collapsing when the money has been consumed in different countries and in Africa. That's why then I say there is a need to address, to earn all the actors or professionals to earn the ownership. Because I do believe that when you have an ownership, sense of ownership over something, you would try to enforce the ethics, and you will try to enforce the discipline that will lead to a sustainable and durable infrastructure. And not only the infrastructure, but the infrastructure that solve the people's problems. I do understand
Thank
that.
you. Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you very
Engineer
much.
Kazawadi. We've lost a bit of time, so we need to move on a bit. Yeah, but thank you very much for that very useful contribution. I'm going to ask one more question relating to the AfCFTA Protocol on Trading Services as it relates to the construction sector. And that again is directed towards Madam Emily. And the question is, how will AfCFTA's dispute resolution mechanism protect contractors operating across borders? So, for example, how will the AfCFTA dispute resolution mechanism protect perhaps a South African contractor who is working on a project in Nigeria if a contract dispute arises? And construction and disputes go hand in hand. They sort of work together. So I don't know whether that dispute resolution has been considered as well by the AfCFTA.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much. And yeah, of course, as you have, in asking your question, you have said one key thing: has it been finalized? Mine is to say that a lot of work is now being put in setting up the panelists and the appellate body judges that we are going to have for our dispute mechanism. And so we have that is ongoing. And as you can imagine, without having further trade, we will not then be able yet to use the mechanism. Another key element, and maybe then it depends on how we look at the issue and what then brings the challenge or the case that you're discussing, we will then also look at, is it an issue of competition policy? And so in this case, the competition policy protocol also comes into play. So yes, the AfCFTA has already set up the legal mechanism that will then help if there is any disputes that come on board. But as of now, we have not seen any challenges being brought to the fore. And that, of course, requires more implementation work to be undertaken before then we can really start the use of the mechanism. And of course, in that case, if you're looking at two companies that are in the construction services sector, then it's also looking at issues of, are there any commitments? Because to be able to bring that construction company to let's say the dispute settlement at the AfCFTA level, Nigeria will then have to already be having commitments in that sector. And the same goes to, did you say Ghanaian? If it's a Ghanaian company, it is the same issue. So both of them, because the first point that you need to look at is is there a commitment that these countries have given in that sector? And then also look at what then was agreed under the regulatory cooperation framework. Then we also look at the competition policy protocol, and then how then have they actually created a problem or in the given sector. So those are some of the key components that we would look at. But just to say that, yes, there is a dispute a resolution mechanism that is now in play. And once we start our full implementation, and it is dispute that happened under the protocol on trading services because of the commitments that have been done, then you can bring your disputes to the dispute settlement mechanism. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Emily. That's very encouraging to hear that there's a dispute resolution mechanism being set up, because it's been flagged as a major a major factor that a lot of companies look for when they're looking for cross-border opportunities. How do they secure their entitlements? And how do they ensure that if they need redress for any particular issue, there is a mechanism to address that. You mentioned one important point which I found very interesting just now, and that's the fact that the different countries need to sign up to whatever those agreements are. It's similar to international arbitration, for example, the New York Convention. If one country does not sign up to the New York Convention, then if an arbitration goes on in another country, you're not able to then, enforce, those arbitrations, So this is a very similar situation that you've raised. Thank you very much for that. We'll now move on to the next topic, which is opportunities for growth and collaboration under the AfCFTA protocol. And I'll call on Lovemore to answer the first question here. So are we entering an era of mega projects? Given that all these infrastructure opportunities that are likely to come up under the AfCFTA, the need for these large infrastructures connecting different countries. So are we now entering an era of mega projects? And will AfCFTA drive increased demand for mega projects right across Africa? Lovemore, over to you.
Thank you. I would actually argue the case that we are already in the era of mega infrastructure projects in Africa. Infrastructure is a precondition for trade integration in Africa. If you can't cross the river with your sack of maize to the other village, you cannot carry out trade. So what the AfCFTA has done by giving us this opportunity or platform to trade between and among each other is this hope of increasing intra-African trade, currently sitting at around 15% and projected to double by 2030, according to the UNECA study. That forecast doubling of trade, intra-African trade, requires infrastructure for it to happen. So we are now consciously aware of the infrastructure shortfalls that we have in our roads, in our railways, in our ports, and in our airports. So the opportunities for infrastructure and therefore construction have been triggered and generated by the AfCFTA. So mega projects are the solution, especially given the corridor frameworks that African member states and the AU have now adopted. We are seeing the Lagos to Abidjan corridor. We are seeing major airports and seaports being constructed in order to meet the demand for infrastructure to drive the growth in the trade that we are anticipating. So yes, the era for mega projects is already here, and what is needed now is to harmonize those regulations and policies that will allow African construction companies to bid and be able to construct the infrastructure that is in serious shortfall at the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. A follow-up question to that, and again to you, Lovmo, is that are there any specific sectors, housing, transport, energy, whatever it is, where you see AfCFTA-driven collaboration, where it could be most transformative? So, what specific sectors in construction, by the way, infrastructure, do you consider that this AfCFTA transformation could be most seen?
I think in the construction of linear infrastructure, roads, railways, I mean, take the SGR rail in Tanzania, connecting Tanzania to Burundi, Rwanda, and DRC. We are looking at 3.9 billion if we express it in cost terms. We are looking at over 3,000 kilometers of rail that need to be constructed, bridges, stations. And as we know, both road and rail, once constructed, they trigger other infrastructure requirements. We see urbanization, cities growing, we see industrial parks growing and special economic zones. And all of these are directly attributable to the demand in trade, especially intra-African trade. There was a comment earlier that our infrastructure previously and historically was principally for us to export raw materials. But as we change and add value to our goods, to our minerals, to our agricultural commodities, and sell to each other, we will begin to see, for example, an anticipated 20% of trade between West Africa and East Africa. That will require infrastructure to be able to move. So yes, the AfCFTA is not only a signal, but it is the catalyst and the driver for trade infrastructure and also for construction opportunities.
Okay, thank you. My next question is to Dr. Hadir. So Dr. Hadir, the Arab contractors operate across several African countries. How will the AfCFTA Protocol on Trading Services change your supply chain for raw materials, like steel and cement? Do you think we are going to finally see sort of truly African materials, replacing imports now that we have this big market?
Well, I believe that AfCFTA create a very important opportunity to strengthen regional industrial integration and reduce African dependence on extra-continental imports for key materials like steel, cement, cable, and prefabricated components over the long run. However, the transition will be gradual. Competitiveness of African product material depends on industrial capacity, energy availability, logistics infrastructure, and consistent quality standard. The AfCFTA provides this enabling framework that underlying industrial investment must accompany it. For the Arab contractors, increasing African source materials would reduce exposure to global supply disruption, shorten the procurement cycle, and lower foreign currency pressure. And it will create a stronger regional value chain. The objective is not simply replacing imports. It's like building competitive African industrial ecosystem capable of meeting the continent's long-term infrastructure needs.
All right, thank you for that. So I know that you said it's not just about, creating that value chain. There's other things involved. And you talked about the part of it dependent on the quality, but also this big market will create an opportunity for creating that ecosystem, in the long term, not immediate, but in the long term, that can then, service that those construction markets. Engineer Kazawadi, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, my comment is that there is already an ongoing initiatives in different countries to try to manufacture some of the most needed materials, like the development of industrial parks, the manufacturing of steel, manufacturing of cement. I know even though it hasn't really been enough in each country to have its sufficient materials, but at least there is that initiative and that pressure for every government to ensure that most of the materials that have the raw materials within their countries are processed internally. So, and this is an outcome of AfCFTA, and we know that are slightly more advanced in the implementation of this than others, which is also very promising, and because those countries are going to give good lessons to those who have not yet started.
Okay, thank you, Engineer Kazawadi. A question for you, actually, Engineer Kazawadi. Based on your role with the Federation of African Engineering Organizations, I know you've been involved a lot in, well, the profession, the engineering profession across the continent in different capacities. What role do you see professional mobility playing in improving product delivery across the borders?
Of course, thank you for that question. Professional mobility, first of all, will reduce cost of the infrastructure, will give employment to the professionals of all and to the manufacturers of those materials. But to get to that, there are certain areas that really needs to be addressed. Like, for example, I would tell you that if we talk of engineers, architects, quantity surveyors, we don't have data. Most countries will give you the number of graduates, but in practice, we know that not all the graduates who graduate in specific fields go to practice them. So, lack of data, I think this should be a challenge for AfCFTA to ensure that first of all, we establish the data. Secondly, we set standards and rules which enable that mutual recognition. But before we have the data, I think even MRAs are going to be very complicated. So my humble request here is that professional bodies stand to work hand in hand with the AfCFTA. Not here in this case, I'm not only talking of the engineers, but I'm talking of all the professions, architects, engineers, environmental experts, scientists. All of them need to be facilitated, first of all, by establishing the data. It is only the continent of Africa that does not have the data, like the Africa engineer, the African architects. All other these countries, you will find the Euro engineer, you find Asia Pacific engineer, you'll find American engineer. For us, we don't have. And for this reason, you will find that most infrastructure, mega infrastructure that are ongoing on the continent, they are not handled by Africans. If you look in different countries, there is less of foreign professionals, non-nationals practicing in different countries than the Chinese and Europeans who are working on projects in each country. So this is really a very big challenge, which is even increasing unemployment, increasing money going outside. So I think we need to harmonize, work on our data. I know some countries are much better than others, like Egypt. Egypt at least has record of having at least 1 million engineers. All other countries, we don't have the registry that where we would know how many engineers do we have. And the ones that I have been involved in the federation, countries will tell you from their experience that what are registered is like even less than 50% of what they think are there. Reason being, regulations are in those countries, but enforcement of those laws is still a problem. So there is really a big gap to establish the data in order to get to the mutual recognition. Another barrier, Emily has already mentioned it about the recognizing the qualifications. Some countries think have better engineers or better architects than others. And this tend to create what I would say the mistrust, collaboration, working together is much. African working with an African is much less than how Africans are working with the Chinese and others. So this is also a mentality issue that really needs to be addressed by AfCFTA with the heads of governments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Engineer Kazawadi. I think the points you've raised just now actually raise wider issues of professionalism and regulations, and actually safety, occupational health and safety. Because if you're saying that there are lots of people who are operating and they're not registered, that raises additional questions, to be quite honest. Because normally you would expect that you can get the data on the people, the professionals from the professional bodies. But if you are saying only that represents only half of those actually operating, I think that's something that needs to be addressed, across the board, because it's a professional sort of conduct and even health and safety issue, so to speak.
Sure.
But thanks for flagging that. We hope that somehow that's addressed as well within the AfCFTA negotiations themselves. All right, we'll move on to the next sort of discussion topic. And here we'll be looking at case studies and best practices in leveraging the AfCFTA Protocol on trading services, looking at some examples that some of our panelists have from their previous experiences. So the first one, I'll be calling on Jumoke to share example of projects or initiatives and lessons sort of that have emerged from those projects or initiatives that you've been involved in, sort of cross-border.
Thank you very much. I have some slides I hope you can project. It will help to move this faster.
Yeah.
So just a few slides to speak to this particular topic. We've spoken extensively about the opportunities that AfCFTA provides different Africans generally, and especially in the construction industry. But the concern is that these opportunities, the value that we see on this slide may very well elude the construction industry, the local African EPCs, if we are not deliberate, about it, and we are not deliberate in how the AfCFTA also helps. I will not spend time on this slide, but let me go to the next slide, which talks about, the picture that we have today in the construction industry, and it's a spectrum of how local EPCs interact or take opportunities in the projects available, across the continent. Earlier, the question that was asked about whether we're beginning to see mega projects as a result of AfCFTA came up, and the answer was yes. But if you find that across those projects, the local participation varies. So on this slide, it just shows how that evolution, how it is today. So the first one is a project that I'm familiar with, which is the floating dock and repair facility at Port of Takoradi in Ghana. So there's a floating dock there, which I was party to the financing and the structuring of it. The floating dock is actually financed, and primary global EPC is China Harbour. And China Harbour has registered in Ghana to provide this service, and has also partnered with the local EPC. But in truth, the local EPC is not a strategic partner. So the control and value is trapped with the offshore EPC, which is China Harbour based in China. But it requires a local entity to work with. The second spectrum is where you have the global EPC participating in mega projects, but the local subcontractors are only involved to the extent of perhaps maybe civil works and minor things. And you find this is the most common across countries. In Nigeria, for example, we call this local content. So you have a global EPC participating, but you have smaller, the local EPCs coming in and just doing local, minor contribution to the entire global picture. Again, with this, what you have is there's local participation higher than what you have in this first station, but control is still primarily offshore. That's the structure begins to change when you go to the third station, where you have the global EPC in joint venture, which in partnership with the local EPC. Here, the responsibility and risk is joint and several liability. And you find this mostly with the West African power pool projects, where the global EPC has a role and the local EPC has a role. In this case, both of them sit side by side. So the local EPC is not on the contract, is actually, sitting, it's participating in the contract. But where we want African EPCs to be is the last station, where the ones actually the prime contractor driving these mega projects, and of course with the local support, with the support of global EPCs. And this is very rare today across Africa. And if you find them, you probably find them in the bigger markets. So we really need to, I think a big advantage and a major thing that the AfCFTA can do for the construction industry is to help to move our local Africa EPC across the spectrum to stage 4. And three things I believe is required. We've talked extensively about professional qualification, the portability of it, and so I won't delve on that at all. But I wonder if we look at the second stage, where we think about cross-border subsidiaries. Today, if a Nigerian company wants to do a business in Ghana, it would have to set up and be regulated, registered, and everything done in Ghana. Whereas if I used the example of the floating dock and repair facility at Port Takoradi, where the company is based in China, it's registered in Ghana, but it can do that, but the strategic decision is still held in China. So I wonder if it's possible for a Nigerian company or a Ghanaian company or a company based in Senegal to operate from Senegal, but to be able to have the opportunity to open offices in other markets where it is doing business without having to go through the regulatory requirements there. And that can easily happen if we have harmonization, of regulation, and it can be done either by sector or, region by region. But really, we need to be able to allow companies, local EPCs, to be able to set up, across different markets. The same way international companies are able to do that across Africa today. The final point here is on the financial infrastructure. So in expanding or building on our financial industry across Africa, we need to find a way such that the credit rating that our local banks are able to have, qualify them to participate in mega projects without having the backing of an international financial institution to provide those guarantees. Because really, when you have that, you increase cost of financing. So is it possible for a bank, say in Ghana or in South Africa or in Nigeria, to provide the guarantees required for mega projects without calling on an offshore bank, international bank, for that extra layer? So these are things that, Madam Emily talked about, the financial industry, what's happening there. So I hope that in looking at this, that will be a consideration, so that financial support can be provided by local banks across Africa. So I'll go to the next slide, and so let me just say that I'm not suggesting that we jettison the support of global EPCs. That is not what I'm advocating here, but I'm advocating that local EPCs, we need to strengthen capacity across Africa and have Africa EPCs lead mega projects in Africa, but with the support of global EPCs. But, we need to, there's still a lot of work and we're still a long way away from getting there, which, and some of the things that, so it's not only on the part of AfCFTA alone. I think that even the local EPCs, when I say Africa EPCs now, also have a part to play. So the first is you need to position, to be able to participate in global in projects across Africa. Today, I think that the most probably widely accepted qualification for EPC companies is the DFI pre-qualification. Because today there's really no standard, for procurement rules and what have you. But the best you can have is what you get from the DFI. So if you become approved or pre-qualified, by DFI, it then allows you to take that standard. If you achieve that in Nigeria, for example, you can take that standard to Ghana, to Senegal, to different markets. So I think for construction companies, it's important that we're able to, move towards positioning and getting this pre-qualification and be able to move that across Africa. And of course, you need to be able to anchor and look for opportunities across border. So, for example, with the floating dock and repair facility, what it has done is coming online now. It's taking the market away from Europe, Las Palmas, Gibraltar, and so all the facility, the repairs will now be done in Ghana. Along the Gulf of Guinea. So all the demand in that area is now being done, will be done by Ghana in Ghana once this business operation takes off. So essentially, you need to look for those opportunities. We've talked about certification and possibility of that, but maybe as a step. A stopgap for this is to look at international qualifications that is acceptable across markets, and start with that. Because my fear with with trying to do everything at once is that fatigue could set in. So we need to look for incremental or little steps that we need to take to encourage. And as we record successes with those little steps, then we can then expand across board. And of course, the private sector needs to be at the table when some of these decisions are being taken. There should be industry-led advocacy. The construction industry should also have a voice on what the priorities are for them, what the pain points are, to participate, so that AfCFTA, in making decisions, take this into consideration as well. I think my last slide is just basically on the floating dock, and I will spend time on that. But I'll just say that the opportunities are enormous, but I believe that there's a journey. There's a journey to get in there, and that journey requires both the AfCFTA contribution and also the construction industry. Also being aware of what it needs to do to position itself, to take advantage of the opportunity that we see across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jumoke. Something that has been consistent in Jumoke's contributions are her suggestions for incremental sort of adoption or incremental implementation of these policies, and the fact that by doing it incrementally, it reduces, as she described, this sort of the fatigue that can be set in when we try to do everything at once, and it increases the chance of success. A quick comment about the issue of procurement of African sort of services, African contractors, and African professional services. I think Engineer Kazawadi's one of his points earlier on about mindset. He might have been speaking in a different context, but there's a mindset issue there as well. That as when we are doing procurement, we look at these procurements purely on merit, rather than some preconceived notion that by procuring from outside the continent, you're necessarily getting a better service in whatever it is. And I think that's very important as well. I've sat in discussions in several places where that has come up as a factor very, very regularly, where people say, well, I guess you're almost 10 points behind in in your assessment of evaluation, just because you are local. But if we strip away, the source or the geographical, location of where you are and just look at it purely on merit, there's a higher chance, that a lot of these African EPCs or professional services, gets to be procured. So I think that mindset is something that needs to be addressed somehow, whether awareness campaigns and intentional discussions. And I hope the AfCFTA is considering that as well. There's a huge basket for the AfCFTA to consider. We're putting everything in your basket today, Emily. So we'll keep on putting it there. But I just want to ask Dr. Hadir to comment on what Jumoke has just said, being that Arab contractors operate across the continent anyway. So is there anything what Jumoke has just said that you might want to comment on?
I'd like to say that also what Madam Jumoke said also about how to get like EPC contractors to go through the AfCFTA engagement to be a leader for projects in Africa. So it's essential. And when currently we work through a model like an EPC plus F, so we try to facilitate also finance for the projects in Africa. When it's like a mega needed projects in Africa, so we try to facilitate it through African support from the banks like AfCFTA Bank, AFC, TDB, and institutions. So they also need to enforce and to help to engage through this important activity like an AfCFTA to go engage with it deeply. And also about the credit rating, I think it's very essential, because when we are trying to deal with international financial institutions or export credit agencies, which need like a portion from local content to go through the projects from their country itself. So they look for the country through the credit rating. So like in Chad, the credit rating isn't very good from Moody's or Fitch, but it has potential, and it has many projects which we go through it, and which we do actually in like Burundi, Chad, in other countries like Zambia itself, Zimbabwe. Also, all these countries have more than potential than what credit rating agencies just to look through. And I follow the news about AfCFTA, which is a credit rating for Africa. And I think it's a very great initiative, and it will be very helpful when it has credibility and certified from also international view or the business view, because it will help construction industry and also the development of African countries. Very, very helpful for them because of the criteria which they assess the development of African countries. It will be like more intensive and more focused on other things more than the risk itself through the financial or the budget. So I think it will be helpful to support this initiative, even to have any construction company to support or to be the leading for this initiative. It needs to be very helpful to engagement, the governments with the institutions of financial institutions, and also so that the construction companies, mega construction companies, can go through these projects.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hadir. To round up this topic, I'll call on Lovemore. Do you have any comments on lessons from cross-border infrastructure projects that could guide AfCFTA negotiations? Yeah.
My comments will be by way of underlining and underscoring what colleagues, other panelists have said. And I also want to bring to the fore the elephant in the room that we are tiptoeing around. There's a friction between citizen empowerment policies that some African member states have in their legislation and the need for us to promote mobility of not only professionals, but African firms to be able to compete for tenders and opportunities across the border. There's a need to address that by aligning and maybe setting common minimum empowerment standards for our citizens, whilst at the same time ensuring that we open the door and we facilitate not only the movement of our professionals, but the ability of our construction industry firms to bid for tenders. In terms of case studies, that would influence and motivate and guide the FCTA in their negotiations for development of the regulatory frameworks for the construction industry. I would only want to urge the FCTA, but also more importantly, the industry, to remember that the highest level ambition for us is to construct cross-border infrastructure which serves not just one, but two or more member states, and therefore adopting a corridor approach where a rail line, a road, a pipeline is from design and concept designed not as a national project, but as a regional project. And this is where regional economic communities like EAC, COMESA, ECOWAS come in. We need to, right from the concept and design stage, ensure that all parties, public, private, regional economic communities, agree to these regulatory frameworks that we are going to negotiate under the construction industry. So it's in terms of framing, the outcome should be able to meet the needs of the private sector and the public sector, not in one country, but across all African countries. That would be my input to this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Lovemore. We're running out of time, so I'll just move on to the last discussion topic, which is about finance and capital. Is capital following the vision and financing and investment opportunities created by the AfCFTA Protocol on Trading Services? So I'll start. Jumoke, I'm going to call on you with this question. Are financiers pricing regional integration risk differently today? So are you pricing the regional integration risk differently when you're...
I think on a project basis, perhaps yes, but generally I think pricing is still country specific. And the reason for that is you continue to see, in pricing, you look at political stability, you have regulatory policy certainty, and where you have, where there are inconsistencies across countries, you're more likely to look at the country-specific factors and price accordingly. And that is why you'll see in certain countries across the continent, there's really the bigger markets will probably have lower premium compared to the smaller markets or the less stable markets. So it's not broad-based yet, But on a project basis, we're beginning to see some form of pricing that recognizes the benefits of the AfCFTA. But a lot still needs to be done to make sure. And what needs to be done is both on the side of the financiers as well as the construction companies, making sure that your project is, so when you strip off, so on the AfCFTA, we've spent time on what AfCFTA needs to do to ensure that the countries, we strip away some of these regulatory constraints or institutional constraints. But on the construction side, we need to do more in making sure that the projects that we're financing or we want to finance are project ready. Capacity is a major challenge, across Africa. And it was spoken earlier where we can pull capacity, we can have maybe a capability hub where we pull capacities across, the continent for maybe whether it's law or structuring or whatever it is, to make sure that, on those projects, we're able to put our best foot forward. We also need to ensure that, on the construction side or on the EPC side, aside from that project preparation, we're able to work, because in reality, we really need to understand the challenges that countries have. If I'm going into Ghana, if I have a regional project like this project I talked about, if I'm going into Ghana, I must be able to also develop the capacity in Ghana so that when I leave Ghana and I move elsewhere, the people in Ghana are able to do similar projects, not at a mega level, but similar projects relevant to them within Ghana. And I think that if we have that sort of structure, governments may be more willing to embrace the what AfCFTA is trying to achieve. On a financing basis, with the mega projects, it's blended finance that you look at. So, and you have to look at the different financiers, what they're looking for. A DFI would be willing to look at first loss, for example, so they come in early and, kind of de-risk the project. But the sovereign wealth funds still have a very low risk appetite, or conservative in sort of their financing. Their risk appetite is still quite low. So maybe they would come in, after the DFIs have come in, and then you then have the other institutional investors, coming in as senior partners. So really, we need to look at that blended finance and what each financiers will be looking at. But the participation of the DFIs coming in at the base level, followed by the sovereign wealth funds, the capacity is there. I know that recently the sovereign wealth funds set up an investment platform of about $2.5 billion to fund projects across Africa. But the capacity, the pricing is still quite high, or the appetite is not there because the projects are not there. The projects are there and they're not ready to come to market. They're not finance ready. So those are things that we still need to take into consideration. So yes, certainly pricing is still a problem. Pricing is still country specific, and where it is not country specific, you're looking at projects, then you'd have institutions like the DFIs coming in, and there's that standard that you then wrap around those projects to make it happen, and that brings down somewhat the pricing, for such projects. So I would say that it's project specific and not so much as broad based.
Thank you very much for that, Jumoke. Dr. Hadir, you've done a lot of financing right across the continent, from a personal basis, based on your role within the Arab contractors. What financing gaps remain most binding for regional construction players from your experience? Yeah.
Okay, I believe that at first I'd like to thank you for this insightful question, and I will say that I believe that the most binding financial gaps today are linked to three main areas. First is a long tenure project financing, as access to long duration instrument. Yes. Access to the long duration instrument matched to infrastructure asset life cycle remains limited, particularly in transport and energy sectors. Second, the risk mitigation tools. As contractors operating across multiple African jurisdictions are often exposed to currency volatility, sovereign risk, delay payment cycle, and political or regulatory uncertainty. In many markets, the availability of guarantees, political risk insurance, and blended finance instruments is still insufficient relative to the scale of infrastructure demand. And the third is contractor liquidity and trade finance. The affordable working capital performance bond and the cross-border procurement financing remain constrained, even for technically strong operators. This gap directly limits execution capacity, and closing these gaps requires cooperation between the government's development finance institutions, export credit agencies, and also the private sector to align with the AfCFTA integration agenda.
You finished, Dr. Hadi?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. So I think with that, we'll come to the end of our panelists' discussions themselves. But we'll take a few questions before we wrap up the entire session. During the course of the discussions, we've had a couple of questions that have come in. So I'll take 2 to 3 of those questions. We'll answer all the other questions later, which we'll send out to the attendees. So I'll just start with this question from Ola Obadara. And the question is, are joint ventures and partnering or partnering an option for tendering and securing larger contracts for EPCs? I think I'll direct that to both Engineer Kazawadi and Jumoke. I think Jumoke brought it up when she was looking at that, but maybe for Engineer Kazawadi as well. So I'll start with Engineer Kazawadi and then come back to Jumoke. So Engineer Kazawadi, the question is, are joint ventures and or partnering an option for tendering and securing larger contracts for EPCs?
The answer is yes. At least from the government projects, taking the example of Rwanda, my country, and the projects that are funded direct by government or maybe development banks, World Bank and ADB, joint ventures, consortiums are all around. And I think this is the international best practice in procurement. Unless some European funded projects do restrict certain countries, but still joint ventures is allowed in most countries, especially with their, for example, in our East African region, the law allows joint venture and partnership in EPCs and other government projects.
Thanks. Jumoke, how do you see this vis-a-vis the sort of roadmap, that you sort of showed us in your presentation?
So the joint ventures could either be, I agree with everything that has the answer to the question. Yes, joint ventures are encouraged actually, because then you bring the best skills together into a room. But there are also joint ventures that can happen across Africa. So in looking at joint ventures, we need to be open to looking at partnerships across Africa before we automatically go offshore. And I think there's a journey. So today, across Africa, we don't have that many mega projects in construction, either rail or ports, but in China and more developed markets that exist. So initially, there's suddenly a need to have joint ventures with global EPCs. That's necessary to also build capacity within Africa. But with time, you then gradually move to partnering with other African countries, where as you build that capacity, you build experience, then you do that. So certainly, partnerships, joint ventures, consortiums are encouraged.
Okay, thank you, Jumoke. I'll go on to another question. This question is from Rizwan Kadri from Tanzania. He's also the president of FIDIC Africa. His question is, harmonizing professional standards across Africa seems to be overlooked. So we've talked about professional mobility. He's talking about professional standards and the harmonization of professional standards across Africa. Currently, each country within Africa speaks differently, simply because we all are in a competitive mode, exhibiting minimum collaboration. And he's asked, can the AU support this agenda to create an accord so that the AfCFTA, FAEO, the Federation of African Engineering Organizations, and FIDIC Africa support member countries, associations, and institutions in a more pronounced manner? I think I'll direct this to Madam Emily. So we've talked about professional mobility. I think right now we're talking about the harmonization of professional standards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and thank you for the question. I think for me, and it's part of also what I answered Femi on the question and answer platform, is that, of course, right now we were still dealing more with the intergovernmental for us at the AfCFTA, because we are negotiating between countries, not individual companies. So what happens in such a case is, at the national level is where we have the involvement of all the relevant stakeholders, and in some cases where the RECs are concerned, they themselves also hold coordination meetings for the negotiations at the AfCFTA level. However, as we move closer to dealing with issues now related to mutual recognition agreements that then involve the direct associations, then we will bring more on board associations that are in the different areas, both at the regional and also the continental level, and also the regulatory organizations. If we're talking the insurance sector, there is the insurance it's called the Organization of Insurance in Africa. And then we have the OISA, which is the regulatory body for the insurance sector. So then we will be able to bring all of them. The regulatory bodies will negotiate MRAs for the regulatory bodies, and you have the professional bodies that will then assist us in developing the MRAs for lack of a better way, for the private sector. So yes, at this juncture, we have been focused more on the intergovernmental bodies, but as we move now towards implementation, and as we develop now the mutual recognition agreements, then we will have more involvement of the different players directly in the negotiations at this juncture. Last and not least, just to bring on board the fact that under the protocol on investment, we have most of these issues that have been raised also covered, and they also it will also help us to ensure that during implementation we have the matchmaking, we have the joint ventures. How then do we ensure also we get the capital at the continental level? They are bringing together capital and doing joint ventures, and not to forget the public-private partnerships that are key when we are talking the construction sector. So there is a lot to be done, but as we move on to the implementation now, we are also looking forward to have coalitions, and we hope to have a coalition in the area of trading services that will be focused on the construction sector. And when I say coalitions, it's like, I don't want to call it a lobby group, but it is like a lobby group where you bring together private sector in the different sectors to actually lobby for governments to better implement the commitments that they have done in the different sector, and to also call, where possible, for the harmonization of laws and regulations. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Madam Emily. So, well, I think...
Can I add something on what you just said?
Certainly you can, Engineer Kazawadi.
Thank you. Basically, to respond to the question of Rizwan, I think it's better this meeting be informed that already the Federation of Africa Engineering Organization and FIDIC Africa have an MOU that assists in capacity building and harmonization of those standards. Federation of Africa also signed the agreement with ARSO, which is an intergovernmental organization charged with developing and harmonizing standards for the movement of persons and goods. So basically, maybe it's up to the Secretariat now to coordinate these initiatives, especially when it comes, because I do believe whether FIDIC or FAO, we have the manpower, we have the human resource which is capable in bringing together all these standards and codes that would assist the easy movement. And so basically, this coordination, what I would say or recommend for this meeting is always the Secretariat to try to engage the professional organizations that are involved in the sector, because they have more information and the database that could otherwise save time in the implementation. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you very much. 1 second. Oops. Sorry, my screen sort of went blank there. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think that will be the last question we will take. Obviously, over the course of this evening, well, sorry, I'm saying evening from where I am. It might be afternoon now, whatever from where you are. But over the course of this webinar session, we've had very good insights into where the AfCFTA is and the various issues regarding the construction sector within the AfCFTA. We've looked at, at a very high level, obviously, how the AfCFTA Protocol on Trading Services is changing the landscape for the construction and infrastructure sectors across Africa. And we've looked at sort of the potential practical opportunities, the current barriers, as well as some actions that have been suggested to unlock regional project investments and cross-border contracting. It's been a very insightful and very interesting webinar. We've had some of the attendees saying that there's still a lot more to be discussed and sort of suggesting that we have follow-up sessions on this. But I really want to thank the panelists for coming here and for the very, very insightful contributions. I think we're all much, much more informed right now of what's going on within the AfCFTA and the journey ahead and the issues that need to be addressed to ensure that this has the transformative impact that is that we're looking at. Just before we finish off, I think we'll just give you an idea of some of our forthcoming webinars, just very briefly, just so that you're aware. So the next one is in July and is on overcoming logistics challenges in the construction sector across Africa. From today's discussions, you'll note, I'm sure you'll agree that logistics is a key issue, one way or the other, and that's what we want to address from a specific African construction context in the next webinar. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you very much to all the panelists, to our distinguished panelists. Thanks for your time on this call, and thanks for your contributions and the insights that you have provided. And also thank you to all the attendees who have participated. There have been a lot more questions. There's been a lot of interactions in the chat box. Unfortunately, we can't attend to all that. This has been the longest webinar session we've had, and I think that sort of speaks to the importance of the topic that we're discussing. So once more, thank you very much to everybody. There will be a YouTube, the video of this, a recording of this will be, the link will be sent out to everybody who took part, and any other resources that we have that the panelists sort of give us permission to to share anyway. We will share with the attendees. So once more, thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists and thanks to the attendees, and everybody have a very good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. Good evening.
Bye.
Bye. That time.